In 1960, an average American worker, no college degree, no special skills, could buy a house, own a car, raise 3 kids, and retire comfortably on one income. Today, that same person has 2 incomes in the household, a college degree buried in student debt, and is still getting priced out of a 1-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized city nobody's ever heard of. That is not bad luck. That is not laziness. That is a system that quietly, over about 40 years, rewired itself in ways most people never noticed. And by the time they did notice, the math had already turned against them. This is not a video about who to blame. This is a video about what actually happened. Because the story is more complicated, and more uncomfortable, than any single villain can explain. Right now, in 2025, roughly 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Not people below the poverty line. Not people who made terrible financial decisions. 60%. That includes people earning $80,000, $100,000, even more in expensive cities. The Federal Reserve did a study a few years ago. They asked Americans, if you had an unexpected $400 expense, could you cover it without selling something or borrowing money? Nearly 40% said no. $400. And the standard response from economists and commentators tends to be, inflation, interest rates, supply chain. All technically true. All completely missing the point. Because what's happening to American affordability is not a single crisis. It's the compounding result of 3 or 4 different systems all breaking in the same direction, at the same time, for the same underlying reasons. Let's go through them. Start with housing. Because nothing explains the affordability collapse faster. In 1970, the median home price in America was about $17,000. The median household income was around $8,700. So a home cost roughly 2 times your annual income. That was the historical norm for most of the 20th century. You buy a house for 2 to 3 times what you earn in a year. Today, the median home price is around $420,000. The median household income is about $74,000. That's nearly 6 times income. In cities like San Francisco, New York, or Miami, that multiplier goes above 10. Now, here's where people usually stop and say, well, supply and demand, we just need to build more homes. And yes, that's partially true. But it doesn't explain everything. Because between 2010 and 2023, something else entered the housing market. Institutional investors. Private equity firms. Corporate landlords. They started buying single-family homes, not to live in them, but to rent them out or hold them as assets. Companies like Invitation Homes and BlackRock-backed funds now own hundreds of thousands of single-family properties across America. When you're a family trying to buy your first home and you're competing against a company that can pay cash and close in a week, you lose. Every time. And here's the part that almost never gets said out loud, the people who already own homes benefit from prices going up. Rising home values have been politically popular. So nobody with power had a strong incentive to fix this. The system wasn't broken. It was working perfectly, just not for you. Now let's talk about wages. Because the housing problem would be manageable if wages had kept pace. They didn't. Between 1979 and today, American worker productivity, meaning how much output each worker generates per hour, has gone up by over 60%. In that same time, wages for the median worker, adjusted for inflation, have grown by about 17%. 60% versus 17%. Someone kept the difference. We just don't talk about it at dinner. The minimum wage is the cleanest example of this. In 1968, the federal minimum wage was $1.60 an hour. Adjusted for inflation and productivity growth, economists estimate it should be somewhere between $20 and $24 an hour today. The actual federal minimum wage is $7.25. It hasn't been raised since 2009. Meanwhile, CEO pay at large American companies has gone from about 20 times the average worker's salary in 1965, to over 350 times today. Now, wages are not the only thing that matters. The cost of things matters too. And here's where it gets structurally interesting: the things that have gotten most expensive in America are the things you cannot opt out of. Healthcare, housing, education, childcare. The things that got cheaper. Electronics, clothing, toys. Things that are nice to have but not necessary for survival. So working class and middle class Americans got slightly cheaper TVs and significantly more expensive lives. The math moved in one direction. Here's a number most people don't internalize. The average American family pays over $23,000 per year in total health insurance premiums, employer contribution plus employee contribution combined. That's money that comes out of what could otherwise be your wages. Employer-sponsored health insurance is not free. It is part of your total compensation that gets routed directly to an insurance company before you ever see it. And for what? The US spends more on healthcare per person than any other country on earth, about twice what Germany spends, nearly 3 times what the UK spends. And yet by almost every measurable health outcome, life expectancy, infant mortality, chronic disease rates, America ranks below most of the developed world. It is, by any objective measure, the least efficient healthcare system among wealthy nations. And it is the only one that can bankrupt you for getting sick. Medical debt is now the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. Not gambling. Not reckless spending. Getting sick. This is not a healthcare video. But here's the point: healthcare costs act as a hidden tax on every American worker and family. It is a direct transfer of wealth, often tens of thousands of dollars per household per year, that simply disappears into a system that, somehow, keeps delivering worse results while charging more. You've probably heard a lot about inflation in recent years. And yes, between 2021 and 2023, prices went up fast. Everyone felt it. But here's what didn't get explained clearly: not all inflation is the same, and not everyone experiences it the same way. When gas prices go up, that hurts everyone. But when asset prices go up, when stocks and real estate go up, that almost exclusively benefits people who already own those assets. The Federal Reserve, between 2008 and 2022, held interest rates near zero for more than a decade. The stated goal was to stimulate the economy. What it actually did was make borrowing money almost free, which caused people with capital to pour that capital into assets, houses, stocks, bonds, because that was the only place to get any return. Assets went up. People who owned assets got richer. People who didn't own assets, who were younger, who had lower incomes, who were starting out, got priced out of ever entering the system. And then in 2022, when actual consumer inflation hit and the Fed raised rates aggressively to fight it, what happened? Mortgage rates went from 3% to 7.5%. Monthly payments on an average home doubled. The people who had locked in low rates kept their cheap mortgages. Everyone trying to enter the market for the first time got hit with the full force of the correction. The people who needed help got the consequences. The people who didn't need help kept the gains. Let's do a quick honest accounting of what the American dream actually costs in 2025. Median home, 30-year mortgage at current rates, about $2,200 a month. Health insurance for a family, roughly $500 to $700 a month out of pocket, on top of what your employer pays. Childcare, if you have one kid, national average is over $1,200 a month. In cities, much more. Student loan repayment, for the average borrower, around $400 a month. That's before food. Before car payments. Before utilities. Before anything. If both parents in a household work median wage jobs, say $40,000 each, $80,000 combined, they're taking home maybe $5,500 a month after taxes. Run those numbers and you have about $500 to $1,000 left over for literally everything else. And we haven't even mentioned retirement. The shift from employer-funded pensions to 401k plans, which began in the early 1980s, transferred the risk of retirement savings from corporations to individuals. Corporations loved it. Individuals were largely unprepared for it. Today, the median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64, people on the edge of retirement, is about $87,000. Which, at standard withdrawal rates, lasts about 4 years. The math doesn't work. It just doesn't. And yet the conversation we keep having publicly is about whether people are buying too much avocado toast. So what is actually going on at a structural level? What happened over the last 40 years is a series of policy choices, some deliberate, some unintended, that consistently favored returns on capital over returns on labor. Tax policy changed. Unions weakened. Corporate governance shifted toward maximizing shareholder value above everything else. Regulations on industries like healthcare and housing and finance were either loosened or captured. None of these were secret. All of them were debated. And in most cases, the argument that one was some version of, the economy will grow, the benefits will trickle down, everyone will be better off. The economy did grow. The benefits largely did not trickle down. And 40 years later, we are looking at a generation, actually, now 2 generations, that will be, by most economic measures, worse off than their parents. That is historically unusual for America. For most of its history, each generation did better than the one before. That stopped somewhere around the late 1970s, depending on what data you use. The gap between what the economy produces and what most people actually experience in their daily financial lives has never been wider. And the political system, which requires money to operate, has never been more saturated with the money of the people who benefit most from the current arrangement. This is not a conspiracy. It's more boring than that. It's just incentives, operating exactly as incentives do. Here is the thing about systems like this. They don't collapse because they're unfair. Unfair systems can last for a very long time. They collapse when enough people stop believing that the future will be better. When the story stops working. The American dream was never just an economic promise. It was a psychological contract. Work hard. Play by the rules. And the life you want is achievable. A lot of Americans, especially younger ones, have quietly stopped believing that. Not dramatically. Not in protest. Just, quietly, practically, in the way they make decisions. They're renting instead of planning to own. They're delaying children. They're choosing not to participate in systems that no longer seem to include them. What happens to a society when the majority of its people stop believing the central promise that holds it together? That question doesn't have an answer yet. We might be living through the early stages of finding out.